If you enjoy listening to The Edge, support them by subscribing to The Edge on iTunes, Stitcher, and you can listen through the iHeartRadio app. Get busy listening.
This is The Edge.
The advantage it means.
Hey, look, I just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
This is The Edge. Edge-show.com.
Hi, this is Mark Thompson. Welcome. Michael Shore is on assignment at the White House in Washington. He's covering the White House for a couple of weeks back there, so we don't have him in studio. We get to Heather Ankeny joining with J. Elvis Weinstein, Josh, and an award-winning economist who has a new book. A lot of his stuff has to do with America and the stagnation of the economy and where there are opportunities for our economy to excel. And we've not had a bona fide economist on the show. I'm very excited to have an economist on our show. We've had Pulitzer Prize winners, as you know. We've had a lot of very accomplished people, but never had an economist. He has some wild stuff. Like, for example, he talks about the fact that it seems as though this is a period of great innovation, but when you actually look at the data, this is not a period of great innovation at all. He includes all the startups, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Apples, the PayPals of the world. He talks a lot about Amazon.com and how that's revolutionized certain things. Anyway, we'll get into that interview with Tyler Cowen and talk economics a bit on the show. This entire show will have you back to your regular life in less than an hour, which is kind of refreshing. You know, I have to say, I don't know about you, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I like listening to podcasts, and I really appreciate it. And I say over and over that you consume this podcast, those of you who regularly subscribe, those of you who have supported us and sent us money and all the different ways you've left good comments and 5-star ratings, thank you. And as a consumer of podcasts, when I see 2 hours and 43 minutes, 3 hours and 37 minutes, 4 hours and 21 minutes, I go, wow, that's a huge commitment. Not to say I don't want to do it, and not to say those shows aren't all great. It's just there are a limited number of hours in the day. So on a long airline flight or something, you're kind of grateful for a podcast that runs that long. But in your daily life, it might be refreshing to have a shorter podcast episode, and that's what we have for you in this episode.
Edge-show.com.
Edge-show.com.
Oh, that was good. I thought that...
That was Josh making sounds.
I used to do that.
Oh, you did? I was thinking, what the hell? I got.
Can you do it under here? Yeah. God, all the boys would do that in class.
Who was the guy who made all the sounds in Police Academy?
Michael Winslow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What happened to him?
He's around, isn't
He's
he?
making sounds.
You're telling
I
me?
assume somewhere.
I'm doing a documentary
He's making
about
sounds in
Michael Winslow.
Laughlin right now. He's making the sound of a Laughlin riverboat right now.
Oh.
Oh, Josh.
I feel like he was like if Donald Trump had stayed with Celebrity Apprentice instead of going to be president, I feel like Michael Winslow's agent would have constantly been pitching him for that.
Probably so, yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know if he
That's
would have
right.
ever made it on, but.
No, because you have to make money to be on the Celebrity. Didn't we learn that from Mary Lou Henner?
Yeah, sure. You have to make money because you have to raise money for your charity.
You have to know rich people.
You have to know rich people.
Right.
Exactly.
Really tough.
Well, you know, Winslow knows
Dancing with-
Gutenberg. He knows Gutenberg.
By the way, I listened back to the episode where you were talking about going to see Steve Martin. It was really funny.
It was funny. Yeah.
I got a kick out of it the second time around.
I listened to it also, and I'd forgotten one thing, which was that I didn't retweet Steve Martin acknowledging my tweet, all because of Josh Weinstein. And
why would you? Why he already
that's what
tweeted.
You do. That's what you do.
He retweeted you.
No, it wasn't.
Therefore, anyone who cares about Steve Martin is following him and sees that he retweeted you.
You see, he doesn't remember the story right.
At all
because he didn't retweet me, Josh. I called it a retweet. So to be fair to you,
you did call it a retweet.
Yes, but he retweeted with comment that was funny. I could have retweeted that because it was different than the original retweet.
Okay.
And what I didn't do is do that, all because of you, who I see
Well,
as...
I see it as good advice still, Mark, so you're not really making me feel bad.
No, I'm not making you feel bad. I'm trying to say you're in my head, even when I'm just like sitting there on Twitter.
There's a lot of advice I could probably give you in the course of your day.
You didn't get enough in his head about the Periscope.
That's true.
Yeah. The Periscope.
Man's been in broadcasting for 40 years, and he's still playing with his phone.
Well, the Periscope actually is one of the things I'm asked about the most
That's
when
good.
I go out.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Who's excited the writers didn't strike?
Okay, I heard
Josh?
that. I heard that.
No, it's great.
Yeah, that's
It's
great.
great. I'm sure that's what you've worked all your life for.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hold on. There's a bigger sarcasm bus coming in, unloading right now.
Oh, is there?
There it is. Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Billy Ray was the main writer in the writers' room last night, working out that
And the Writers Guild.
in the Writers Guild. Yeah,
And the Writers Guild.
everyone was thanking Billy Ray at like midnight last night.
They voted to continue working. They got some concessions, I guess, to their.
Yeah.
I guess so.
They've got one of the best health care plans in Hollywood. I mean, maybe in the country.
I'm still living it.
Yeah.
It got me through cancer.
How does that work?
It's just a good health plan. You know?
How
What does
do
that
you
mean?
get it every
it
year?
covers a lot of stuff, or
Huh?
what is it?
How do you get it every year?
I get it because I worked for years and years and saved up enough points that I'm still living off them despite
I still have to get it every year.
documentarying.
When you say it's gotten you through cancer and stuff, does it just mean it covers more things when you say it's really good, or is there a
I don't know. All I know
or?
is that it was there for me when I had cancer. I never compare. It's the only health insurance I've had as an adult. So
It's got to be close to what our SAG-AFTRA one is, Mark.
I don't know about that. Our SAG-AFTRA one
No, I
is
think it's
not
better.
great. Yeah, I think
But it's got to be. I feel like ours is pretty darn good. I think it used to be better.
pretty darn good. How? It doesn't cover dental, doesn't cover eye care.
we got
I have
dental.
dental.
We
I have eye.
dental.
You just
No,
have to
let's
make
do
a
that.
certain amount of money.
No, well, believe me, I make a certain amount.
Well, then you should have it.
Well, I guess maybe someday.
Maybe
I
if
will.
you get to the deluxe level, you'll be happy with
It's not
it.
even that deluxe. You should
up
have
here,
it.
up here at the platinum level, Mark, they cover everything. I don't see what your issue is.
And now, actually, for even the lower rung of income, everyone gets mental health as of this year.
Ah, yes, the lower
So-
rung. I remember.
Feel free to check and
Those
read.
crazy bastards.
Feel free to check and read.
Finally.
I may start a
The
club.
lower tier, there's plan 1, plan 2. That's what I mean.
Mental
plan 1
health
is
for
better.
lower tier
I'd like-
actors is a boon. I
See?
assure you.
Thank you.
I want to start a bar called the Lower Rung.
Come on, there was a good joke there. I just couldn't think of the bar.
That's what Josh is here for.
I know. I'm looking at him, and he didn't
You
say
dump the
anything.
stuff in front of Josh, and he'll turn it into some magnificent creation.
I'll take shit and make shit aid.
I want to welcome a bona fide economist to our crew. He's the real thing. Author, professor, and he's written a book that is provocative. He is Tyler Cowen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The book is called The Complacent Class, The Self-Defeating Quest for the American Dream. Now, we'll get into a lot of this in the moments that follow. You have some surprising assertions in your book, sort of that I never would have thought about entrepreneurism and about mobility and about some other things. But before we get to that, we've never had an economist on, I don't think, guys.
Really? That's amazing.
What are the odds?
No, we've done a lot of
Actor,
stuff.
filmmaker,
Yeah,
radio personality.
We've been around for 4 years,
It's true.
It's true.
and yet never an economist.
Eventually, we'd get to all the people in the neighborhood.
Yeah. So before we actually just drill into this complacent class, if you guys have any wild card questions about the economy, economics, for example, I have one, Tyler.
Okay, good. Good.
You-
For a long time now, I've wondered how those little shops, some of them in very, very high valued real estate areas, how those little shops that sell only coffee make money.
Like Abbott Kinney Boulevard in Venice.
Yeah, now there are more and more of them in America. I've always wondered how are there basic economics that actually justify an investment like that?
The markup on those drinks and donuts is pretty high. So if you see a restaurant, they sell more things, but actually on the food, often they're just breaking even. Where they're charging people more is on the drinks. So a coffee house, in essence, is just moving to the drinks directly and cutting out the items they don't make money on. So they can do pretty well, actually.
So if I pitched you on opening up a coffee house there at George Mason University where you teach, I'm guessing it still would be a tough pitch.
Well, I think there's slight overcapacity in the market. Starbucks overexpanded. Everyone copied them. Coffee's much better, but ultimately coffee can only get so good. And I don't see at this point what you would really do to compete and have your product stand out. So I would say no to your pitch.
Okay. Well, you wouldn't be the first to say no to a pitch that I have.
The other deadly area I've read a bit about the economics of delis, delicatessens, and how so many are dying out, and the only ones that really survive now are ones that own their own real estate. If they own the building,
correct.
they have a shot. Otherwise, there's just
Why?
Well, with delis, part of the thing of a deli is you can't adjust your stock you have to have everything on the menu. That's part of, so it's all these expensive items that you have to have fully stocked all the time.
That go bad and
right. And are sort of marginal earners, but they still have to be there for you to be a bona fide deli.
I feel like restaurants in general are just really, really difficult.
Well, they always say shy away from restaurant investments. I have a couple of them, and I did it for different reasons. I did it for reasons that had nothing to do with business, but
do you really?
With making money. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's for another show.
Okay.
My father loved to say, if you want to make a small fortune in the restaurant business, start with a large one.
Yeah, right. But, if you look at block for block America today, you see a lot of these coffee shops, as you say, Tyler, that these, we've overdeveloped in this one area. I mean, they've overextended, even Starbucks has. It would suggest, though, on the surface, that America is doing pretty well.
In the coffee dimension, we're doing great. Never been better.
But it would suggest, hey, this country must be doing pretty well if they're busy putting up coffee joints every half block. But the truth is, we've plateaued in this country, is your point, with the complacent class. Isn't that essentially what you're saying?
Correct. And to refer back to coffee houses, most of the jobs in those places are dead-end jobs. The wages don't go up much. There aren't that many opportunities for big promotions. Productivity is pretty flat. So we're at a state of affairs where a lot of lives are very comfortable, but precisely because they're comfortable, people are digging in and losing some of their dynamism.
You talk about the comfort thing over and over, and it refers to getting to a situation where life's kind of good, and as a result, you don't move. You talk a lot about mobility, too. I guess you're saying through time and the evolution of this country, earlier generations were more mobile. They would literally go from place to place to seek economic opportunity or lifestyle changes. You don't have that now.
That's right. It's mainly our immigrants who move. And moving across state lines is down 50% from the post-war era. So there are just fewer reasons to move. There aren't that many rapidly growing parts of the country, and one of the ones we have, Silicon Valley, it requires very special skills that actually not that many people have.
I want to get back to Silicon Valley in a bit, but why is that movement so important economically?
Well, I think it's a symptom of dynamism, that there's a better life somewhere else, that you have hope. You're reaching for something, you have a lot of ambition, you're willing to take chances. Now, labor markets adjust more slowly after a recession. Unemployment lingers for longer. People seem less willing to seize opportunities, to start new businesses. They live at home for more years, even though we're a wealthier society. I take all of those as signs of our complacency.
Because you're an economist, basing so much of this on data. I mean, these are not just sort of sweeping philosophical notions. A lot of this stuff is, you demonstrate essentially your conclusions. What has happened to the growth of this country, just in terms of the X's and O's of it all?
Well, if you look at productivity, which is how much are we bringing new ideas to bear on production rather than just having more kids or taking in more people. In the old days, productivity used to grow, say, 2 to 3% earlier in the 20th century. Lately, it's been growing in the range of 1 to 1.5%. Obviously, that's lower. And if you compound a lower rate of growth over decades, you end up with a society that's much poorer, actually more segregated in many ways, and in general has less of a dynamic feel. And that's the world we've inherited, so to speak.
One of the reasons that people don't move, you could say, is because of the internet. It's kind of opened up the world. You don't need to move as much. You can make a decent life for yourself wherever you are. But you're saying, and I mentioned this in the context of the movement that we were just speaking of, that movement still, the physical movement, is important. And that internet actually is helping to magnify the problem of complacency.
That's correct. The internet is wonderful. And of course, we're speaking over the internet. But it's so easy these days to just sit at home, watch your Netflix streaming, get your packages with Amazon. Now, those are real conveniences. They're conveniences I use also. I don't mean to moralize against them, but I think we need to realize there is a secondary effect where people's mentalities or visions of the future, they become more static, less mobile. They have less to do with building or physical space and more about, accelerating the transformation of information, but actually using that as a way of slowing down broader kinds of social change.
I never really thought of it this way. I've always felt like the complacency was sort of brought upon by lack of options. not because choosing to stay in or choosing to be okay with that coffee house job that was good enough and got you good enough benefits and you could put your kid through school. I feel like there's just not enough of those opportunities out there anymore with the whole, the middle class going away. No?
Well, I think it's part of the same picture. So if every individual does something safer and more static, when that is magnified collectively, it will mean fewer options for many people. So each of us trying to have more options, it's counterintuitive, but it means that change slows down, job growth slows down, fewer new businesses, and it does restrict opportunities for the next generation.
It seems like part of the problem is the cost of comfort has come down to a pretty low level, so that's no longer a major incentive for people.
That's right. It's easy enough to do okay. And people who are, say, unemployed, if you look at their search behavior on the internet, they search more for pornography sites than for how to get a new job. There's a new book out showing that.
There's got to be some crossover there.
Yeah, maybe they're looking for a job at a pornography place. Yeah.
People, they medicate themselves at much higher rates. They're much less willing to expose their children to any kind of danger at all. Now, all of these practices have some benefits or we wouldn't do them, right? But at the same time, we become scared of our own shadows, not taking enough chances, not creating enough opportunities for other people.
This is interesting on a couple of different levels because we just had a historian on and we talked a lot about history and the post-World War II boom that happened. Economically, I'm talking about, in this country.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of in the context of, is America a dying empire? You always hear that, America's suffering the same thing that so many empires before it have suffered. It flourished, and now it's inevitable that it's going to go away and fade. Economically is usually the way it fades. He made the point that, no, not necessarily, and I wanted to ask you, a real bona fide economist. In the post-World War II period, there was an economic boom in this country that was literally unsustainable. We, if you will, won World War II. We were watching Europe and all these other countries come back and rebuild, and sort of by definition, we were dominant. But in the years that followed, we wanted those other nations to be robust economically, and that's kind of what happened. And we've sort of taken a seat at the table a little farther down.
That's true. And, I don't think we're doomed, but I do think we need regeneration. So we're very heavily in debt, sometimes personally. The savings rate in this country is running at about 5% for households, which is not that high. Our government is making a lot of promises, especially to the elderly, what it will pay for health care in the future. And we actually need to summon up the resources to pay for this. So I would say in the long run, I would bet on the American people and their talent. But we're only going to get out of it by having a rather abrupt change of course, moving away from all of the safety. I think some external shocks are going to hit us and wake us up, as indeed they did right before World War II. I just think that will be a very rough transition.
Like what?
Well, one of them would be we run out of the ability to pay our bills. One version of that came with the Great Recession and the financial crisis for some people that could spread to governments. Another version could be that America is unprepared to face a lot of its foreign policy obligations, and we would leave the rest of the world hanging. We could have both of those happen at once. But right now we are spending and borrowing and making promises at an unsustainable rate.
So how do you?
So it's not enough to just stick with the coffee houses.
But how do you convince people to be less safe?
Well, I think there is no way of convincing them, precisely because being safe is pleasurable. And if we were going to take more risk, we would have done it already. So what I outline in the book are a number of scenarios whereby, risk just comes and gets us. You cannot run from risk forever, just like sooner or later you're going to die. And I think that's what will happen to this country. I do think we'll respond in a good way, but only after a lot of pain and suffering and mistakes.
You said something, this was a real shocker, with Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram and Uber, and we could go on literally for an hour, which might be a fun game sometime, just to list different startups. But I was astounded that you actually assert that the millennials are the least entrepreneurial generation in history.
So far, that's true. Now, there's still time, but keep in mind, they were born into a world that had an economic downturn, not such a great job market. They have higher rates of student debt. You could blame it on the baby boomers. I don't feel millennials are morally defective in any way, but in terms of risk-taking and ambition as a whole, their situation is not entirely fortunate. And again, you look at numbers from the data, like how many years do they still live with their parents? Pretty depressing. And a lot of them, they don't seem to have jobs. They're not married. They marry at later rates, interested in having fewer children. Those are not necessarily bad decisions. I'm just saying when you magnify them to the collective level, it again means a slower growing society.
Well, you see them all as a professor. So when you say these things, you're telling us that they're a more guarded group, that they're risk averse a little more than their ancestors, than past generations.
Yes, I also think they're the nicest generation I've ever seen, the most tolerant. That's to their credit.
Too.
Maybe those two things in some way go together, but they're not like a rough and tumble group.
No, it's not a cutthroat generation, I don't think. And I think my theory of late is always that this generation looked at the menu of fame and fortune and picked fame and thought fortune was kind of less important, because they can have a driver now. It gets right on their phone.
Right. That's true.
I was having a discussion today with someone, I guess he's 21 or 22, and I was telling him when I was a kid, I was growing up in the 70s, that boys in, 6th grade, 7th grade, they would go to gym class and then they would all shower together in the same shower. And he found this shocking and barbaric, as if we were some group of Spartans.
I have to say, at the time, I found it shocking and barbaric as well.
I wasn't feeling keen on it either. But
Wait, do they not do that anymore?
Apparently not.
He said they don't. He was only speaking for himself. But the notion that would be viewed as this incredible inconvenience, whereas at the time we all just viewed it as roughing it and, okay, we're going to go to gym, we're going to shower. Let's not worry about this too much. And I think there's a kind of fussiness that set into our society.
I don't know. There was a time in my life where the gym shower was a central piece of anxiety for me.
Huh.
The alternative may be worse, however.
Maybe.
Yeah. That's a different guest, I think, for us, Josh.
I don't know. I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you that there is a reason that motivated that change.
That's
too.
a Neil Strauss visit.
No, I hear you. I actually, of course, I shared the same
Gentle
thing.
little flowers like me.
It was a weird thing. I mean, even look, when you're coming from the house, which you sort of got some privacy in, I agree that group shower thing in locker room was a little weird.
Maybe it's a dude thing.
There were parents who were, sent to jail for allowing their kids to play outside, or at least they're brought before the police for questioning.
That's right. There's a famous case not far from where you are, right? Where the kids were in the park.
What happened?
That's right. And it's very safe around here.
Kids were in the park playing. There were no parents supervising.
Oh, just recently?
This is maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
But there have been multiple cases,
yeah.
But it turned into a big deal. I mean, it turned into a police matter. You talk about the segregation of society. You mentioned it a moment ago, and you mean across the board segregation, but it starts economically, right?
By income. So rich people are much more likely to live near other rich people than several decades ago. And same, of course, for poor people. That then often translates into racial segregation. But I think income is the driving force. It's not that people are more racist. Cities especially, a place like San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Manhattan, poorer people are being pushed out more and more.
My sister who lives in New York says, Mark, the thing about you guys in California is you're in your cars and you never rub up against anybody who's not just like you. You get out of your car wherever you want to go and you run inside and you're never on the street rubbing shoulders with other people. In New York, we have homeless people rubbing shoulders with millionaires. And the more she talked, the more I thought, I'm glad I'm just in my car and not on the street rubbing. But in a way, that's kind of what you're talking about. Yeah, right.
It's actually good for mobility when children live in mixed neighborhoods and poorer kids have some contact with wealthier kids. It's better for this country. It's the country we used to have. Cities, I think, are gentrifying too much. And politically also, we're very segregated. There are Clinton supporters who didn't know a single Trump voter. Trump voters who think Clinton supporters are just insane. And, whatever side on that you want to take, it's not a healthy state of affairs when the 2 points of view are so separate.
You're talking about something that would seem to depart from just the pure economics and get into sort of more of the social structure of it, but it all spills over, doesn't it?
Yes, but it's driven by the economics.
And so do you think there's an opportunity cost going in the direction of the impoverished, but is there like an empathy cost for the wealthy?
I think it's harder to have empathy for people you don't have much contact with. So I think today's educated wealthy, they have a lot of empathy for the poor. But if you ask, do they have empathy for, say, like the middle class Trump voter somewhere in West Virginia? It's not actually so much. And the people in West Virginia sense that. And again, you get this social divisiveness.
When you actually detail the turn of the century, I'm talking about the turn of the last century, and you go through all the different things that this country was about. I mean, all the different innovations, I mean, literally everything from mass communications to flight. It did feel like, in a way, a more exciting time. And I'm wondering if that's, I was thinking maybe I've just become used to all these changes. I mean, the fact is that the fact that you can connect with anybody in the world and access so much information in the palm of your hand, that's pretty exciting too, but I've sort of become accustomed to it.
That's really exciting. But the thing is, in most other areas, there hasn't been that much change. So take a train today or 40 years ago.
Right.
It's not really better. In some ways, it may be worse. Take a flight today or a few decades ago. It's not obvious that it's better. You look at the energy sector. Well, we thought in the 1960s we would have the whole world using nuclear energy and it would be safe and clean. And we've moved away from that. We thought we would, explore the solar system. Well, finally, we're getting back to it. But we had, decades where the space program was dormant. So what's striking to me is other than communications and tech, the world is pretty similar. And, I cook in a kitchen from the 1950s. It's not been much updated. And that works just fine. And that would have been inconceivable to my grandmother.
And that's kind of the point, that it's good enough.
It's good enough. That's correct. I don't even have to use the microwave. So information, that's where there's been the big dynamic changes. And people who are journalists, academics in finance, people who love and consume information, I would say they're really much, much better off. But, for a lot of people to have, say, Facebook instead of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, maybe it's an improvement, but it's not life-changing. And for people who are not obsessed with information, wages are only up a bit and life feels pretty stagnant.
Yeah, when you talk about the things that, like getting from here to there, the bridges, the tunnels, the new airports, infrastructure type stuff, that stuff is way behind. I mean, it's
all a mess.
Yeah. And,
it could be better in China, a much poorer country.
Well, it doesn't take as long to get things done in China, that's for sure.
It can take us years, just to rename a bridge, much less, build a new one.
Well, that's a lot of what Trump, who is a builder and a businessman, was saying when he was getting rid of some of those regulations, is that it could take 10 years just to get the approval to get through every regulation.
Just to take down safety nets.
Not even that. But, he's coming from a place of it takes us forever to even get clearance to do anything.
No, that's absolutely correct. The problem is Trump doesn't know how to get things done quickly in Washington. So his rhetoric is all about change, but the practice of Trump, you're actually back to stasis.
Yeah, you talk a lot about stasis, that, nothing's moving really one way or the other. And that's where we are, essentially, or that's where pockets of our society are.
That's where most of us are. I wouldn't say that about Silicon Valley, but I would say it about our politics. I would say it about most of our economic sectors. I would say it about our physical world, our infrastructure, and our transport.
Our government, you make the point, is it's not just the bureaucracy. The government is bolted down to certain spending, and a bunch of the spending is locked in. So there's not even a dynamic aspect to government spending.
That's correct. So even in President Obama's budget, what's called discretionary spending, the plan was for that to fall in real terms. And Trump tried to cut that. So because we're aging, more and more money goes to protect the elderly. And I'm not trying to say that's all a big mistake, but still there's a problem, spending for research and development or spending on science, spending on drug development. All of those areas now are problematic. And we're in a world where maybe antibiotics will stop working because of drug resistance increasing, and we can't spend more on science. That, to me, is a major issue.
You talk about discretionary spending. You're talking about the literal decision-making that can be done on certain budget items so that they're not locked in and just pro forma every time. Isn't that what that means?
Correct. But more is taken up by Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt. That's more and more of our federal budget each year.
Yeah, that's virtually 80%, I think you said.
That's right.
It seems, to Heather's point, just when she mentioned Trump, that Trump might be the shock to the system that kind of gets everybody off their ass, that gets everybody into the street. We've already seen a lot of protests. That activism has to give you some sense of hope, even if people
I bet it doesn't. No, I'm just kidding.
No, and that's, by the way, prior to this and prior to Trump, I've always talked about activism. I kind of support any activism. I even supported the Tea Party just because they were making noise and making a point, even though I didn't agree necessarily with all of their notions. Anyway, does that activism that's been jump-started by the new president, does that represent some hope?
It does give me hope, but what I also see is a Washington more or less back to normal, where even though the Republicans control all major branches of government, they're not getting their agenda through. Like the Democrats, actually, they don't actually have a vision for how the future could be very different from what we see. And we used to talk about gridlock, but now it's actually an intellectual incoherence because no one has this vision. And I think that's part of the complacency. And, you know, Trump's checklist when he got elected, basically none of it has been fulfilled except the Supreme Court justice. And again, whether you like his ideas or not, what's striking is, you know, the Republicans, they voted 60 times to repeal Obamacare. Now they're in power. They can't vote once to do it. That, again, is a kind of stasis.
Well, let me ask you this, coming off on the heels of them going nuclear to get Justice Neil Gorsuch in place, and now Trump, even as of yesterday, saying, you know, I want to change the 51%, you know, change it to 51%. And it seems so whiny that, oh, you got to change the rules in order to get anything done. But that's definitely not stasis. Right?
Well, they changed that rule. They finally appointed a justice. He's a pretty normal mainstream Republican. That's fine, but it hasn't made a radical difference in Washington. Tax reform is not passing anytime soon. Obamacare repeal is not happening anytime soon. Those executive orders he issued are not getting through. So it's remarkable to me how little that's mattered.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems people are much more true to an ideology than they are to progress.
Yes. So, you know, earlier in the 20th century, people believed so deeply in progress. They wrote science fiction stories about how different the future would be. And now we write dystopias, and we're not really even sure how we want to change things. And you see that in the Republicans now that they're in power. Mm-hmm. They're like the dog that has caught the parked car and isn't quite sure what to do with it.
It's odd. And, you know, it's funny. I never really thought about it before this instant in the context of your book and the stasis that you talk about and the complacent class. Like everything's slowed down now in Washington. There's one party clearly in power, and yet they must have some interest in keeping things exactly the way they are. Otherwise, things wouldn't be exactly the way they are because you got one bunch of people able to move in whatever direction they want.
That's correct. And I think citizens in general, they don't have a vision for seeing the urgency of exactly what must be changed. There's a general sense they're unhappy or something isn't working. You get this also in the United Kingdom. They vote for Brexit. They view that as a kind of change, but it turns out the change they have in mind is to go back to an illusory past where they had all the benefits of the current day but didn't have to pay anything to the EU. And now they're learning that doesn't really exist either. And they don't know what to do next. They don't know really what their negotiating stance is. They just want a free lunch.
That's why I thought it was genius, maybe accidental genius, but genius to use the campaign slogan, Make America Great Again. Of course, Reagan had used the phrase before, but that was never really referenced in any kind of important way. And the Make America Great Again slogan is one of those things that means different things to different people, right? What is America Great Again meaning to any 10 people? Probably 10 different things.
Except they're all racist.
No, but it's a callback to the past, which is what made me think about, Tyler, when you mentioned that they have that sort of wistful sense of the past.
Exactly. You know, I would much prefer more of JFK's New Frontier mentality. Or think of the phrase Great Society, New Frontier, New Deal. Again, whether you're Republican or Democrat, just the words, the kind of vision they conjure up. New, change, forward motion.
Mm-hmm. Even the city on the hill
Make
was
America Great Again. The Clinton campaign, again, very backward looking, a sense of, well, it's her turn. Everything was fine under Obama. I'm only going to change things a little bit. And of course, voters weren't really inspired by that.
How do we stack up worldwide economically? I mean, maybe you could answer this question in two parts. How we stack up, you know, your sense of things economically, and then more to the point in the conclusion of your book or the thesis of your book, which is, you know, how we stack up in terms of sort of the ethos that is America now.
Well, we're still the world's economic leader and main innovator. So the problems we've been talking about, Japan, Western Europe, they have them too. It's not unique to the United States. I think we have bigger social problems than, say, Canada, Australia, Western Europe, or Japan. We've done a bad job managing those.
Is that because we have sort of a greater plurality of racial and ethnic mixes here?
That's some of it, but some of it's just, you know, we've screwed it up and haven't been careful with good policy and education. So a lot of it's just our fault. We could have done much better, but we didn't see the urgency in doing so. But I think we've lost the self-confidence we had, and the rest of the world has realized that about us now, that we don't have it anymore. And we're kind of a sitting duck, and we're not that much respected at the moment. And everyone's sitting there wondering, well, what comes next? They thought we would at some point announce it or solve that problem for them. And now they're waking up, scratching their heads like, hey, those guys in America, they have no idea what's going on. And that to me is sad, but it's true.
You know, I pay a lot of attention to the environment, so I now recently on this show referenced the fact that even though everybody's talking about a failed presidency in his first 100 days, the fact is that with many, many executive orders, President Trump has rolled back huge, sweeping protections on the environment, on wildlife, on very delicate habitats and the like. And I look to China now, believe it or not,
No way.
as being a greener nation, at least in terms of their view of the future. So I ask you, I have that kind of sense of things, but I ask you economically, and you talk about sort of everybody looked at America before, and now they're kind of double clutching on that look. Does China represent maybe the future for world dominance in both economic ways and for their society?
It is a more dynamic country, and in fact, the genesis of my book was my frequent trips to China, and I thought, well, I should write sort of a history of the United States from Chinese eyes. Like, how do we look to them? Maybe we still look a bit dynamic to Western Europeans, but to the Chinese, we look pretty sluggish, comfortable, and complacent. And that's where the book comes from, is thinking about this from the point of view of China.
It's odd, too. I guess they look here at America as still a place where there are greater freedoms than many of the countries.
It's a great place to send your kids to school and then bring them back home.
To become ruling autocrats, right? But
the air is cleaner here, which is a huge, huge advantage. I wouldn't want to give that up. But even in terms of freedom of speech, put aside the law, like what you can actually say in public. I think there's arguably more freedom of speech in China than in the United States in terms of political correctness, or people here, getting in trouble for saying things they're not supposed to say.
Right.
No, that's a really good
point.
Yeah,
I just did a documentary about stand-up comedy in Asia and China, and absolutely, it's racism goes really well as long as you don't mention Taiwan or Tiananmen or Tibet. Everything's cool.
I see it. As long as you don't say something inflammatory against the government.
Right.
Is that true for China?
China's complicated. They want people to say some bad things against the government as a kind of outlet, and so they can learn what they need to correct. But you can't say bad things that fundamentally challenge the government's right to rule. And their lack of political correctness, it has its own costs, that there's less, overt racism here is a good thing. But still, it's taken too far. There's plenty of things you're not supposed to say that are not racist. They're just controversial. And everyone walks around on tippy toes, especially in academia, not wanting to cross those lines. And that, I think, is a shame.
Yes, I think any time you have people walking around with sort of a knee-jerk instinct for self-censorship, you're losing ideas.
And that's this country.
And you are on a college campus where you've sort of been the focus of a lot of that lately. Not your campus per se, but the censoring of different opinions and the censoring of different viewpoints on college campuses, which are supposed to celebrate different viewpoints.
Yes, I would stress my campus is quite different and much better. We have a very high percentage of international students, and we're very diverse and open. It's the schools where you have a lot of spoiled rich white kids, actually, that are the problem. But my school's great, very open.
Hey, I need a trigger warning when you say spoiled rich white kids.
Where did you go to school, Josh?
I dropped out to do a puppet show, Heather.
Oh, that's
Doesn't
great.
matter.
Josh is one of the original cast members of Mystery Science Theater 3000. So you got a different kind of education, Josh. Well,
Did you say what campus? Because
George Mason University in Northern Virginia.
I had a friend that played soccer there.
Most international campuses in this country.
Awesome.
Yeah, right outside where I grew up, Washington, D.C. Actually, it's a much better city now, I think, because it is so international. When I was growing up there, it was basically blacks and a handful of white people.
And diplomats' kids.
And now it's Indian and every ethnicity, it would seem. It looks like the UN. It's great. You're like at the bus stop, and it's just really, I think it's cool. I just love all the different accents and languages, and, it's awesome.
Wonderful place to live. And it's not some single dominant foreign group where it's like us against them. It's like everyone's here.
Exactly. I have a kind of a last question to ask an economist. This is a really street kind of question from Average Joe's street. And that is because that's really what
Is this a character you're going to do?
No, this is truly who I am. I took one econ class, and it was Econ 101, which I think I had to take. And they taught you the very first concept. Tyler, do you remember the very first concept, at least where I was? I was at Colgate University. And they taught there are no free lunches, is what they
Correct.
Yeah. and then everything kind of goes from there. Everything you want, you got to pay for somehow.
There's always a cost.
But what I was going to ask is, just as a normal person who takes in information, we're hit with the Dow Jones Industrial Average every day and the S&P 500 and all that kind of thing. What are the economic indicators that really matter, and where is that information available?
Well, how many people are working? I would say the labor force participation rate is important. Generally, the rate of economic growth, the rate of productivity increase. You can get all these from the Census Department, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Council of Economic Advisors at the government. They publish all of these. Right now, the economy's okay, but it's slow and not impressing anyone. But we're past those disasters from like 2009. But it's been an uninspiring recovery, no matter how you look at it.
Why do you think the stock market is performing so well? Is it just because of the deregulatory fervor in the air?
I don't think so, because it was doing well before Trump won. I think, global markets have opened up, and the companies on the stock exchange, very often they're global companies, and they're selling to a lot of countries. That's good for their profits. I mean, that's all great news, but it's not the same as like Main Street in the United States doing equally well. Clearly, It's not. And that's what we're seeing. I don't begrudge the companies their successes, but we need to make it more of a domestic story now.
Since the publishing of your books, how many books have you published?
More than 15. I've lost track.
Wow. Isn't that great?
Jeez.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, do your classes sort of go up in demand as a result of your profile that way? Or have you not really noticed that? Have you become a little more of a rock star?
Probably that's the case. It's hard to measure, because enrollments are growing anyway. I mean, they'd be going up anyway, but it's a lot more attention.
What's the average class size at George Mason there in one of your classes?
Really depends what level you teach at. Class sizes can range from like 5 to 200, but typically 20 to 30.
No, that's great. That's really great. Well, the book is The Complacent Class, The Self-Defeating Quest for the American Dream. Anybody have any questions before I excuse the witness?
What do you do for fun?
Oh, that's a good question.
I write books for fun.
Oh, okay. Such an economist.
And I do podcasts.
Hey, really enjoy your stuff. I'm looking forward to getting into more. I'm kind of going back in time now and taking in all the stuff that you have done. So it's really been fun. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for the interest. Take care.
See you,
Bye.
Tyler.
Bye.
Bye. Well, I want to thank you kids for being here.
Bye.
Kind of
fun. It was as fun as I've had with an economist.
He's got a lot of stuff, makes you think. I was astounded when he suggested that this isn't the most entrepreneurial generation. Are you kidding me?
I think they're disruptors more than they're entrepreneurs.
That's exactly what he said. He said they're viewed as disruptors. Yeah. Good, Heather. That's exactly right.
Look at that. Yeah. It's like it was already there. They just disrupted it.
No wonder you're at the platinum level.
Well,
Yeah.
every once in a while I get that.
He is J. Elvis Weinstein on Twitter. Throw an @ in front of that, and you can talk to him. She is at Heather Ankeny, and I'm at Mark T. Live. That's just one of the ways that you can reach us. You can also leave us disturbing comments on the website.
Please.
Yeah.
Those are so fun.
But we appreciate you being here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See you next time.
You're listening to The Edge.
Oh, okay. Let me just. I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. And if you haven't already, why don't you show your support and subscribe? Go to Edge Show. Oh, it's Edge Dash. What's with the dash? Stupid. All right, I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. Show your support and leave something on their website, edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is there a dash?
edge-show.com.